All right, Thomas Wertman from MUFON. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you tonight?
Good. Thank you for being on the show. I appreciate your time.
Oh, no problem. Anytime you want.
Good. Go ahead and just let's tell everybody who you are, what your background is.
Well, my name is Thomas Wertman. I'm the state director of the Mutual UFO Network of Ohio. And I've been state director now since, trying to think now, about 7 years. And I joined MUFON itself back in 2008 as a field investigator and kind of worked my way up like a lot of us do.
Oh, so, as you know, from the field, I guess the field investigator would be the more exciting role, right?
Well, it's interesting because you get to deal with the public and you never know what types of cases are coming in. And I'm the type of a guy, I'm very analytical, very detail oriented, very data driven. And when a case comes in, I just don't like to look at a case and let's say you see a picture or, if you talk to the witnesses, I mean, they've got a lot of compelling stories out there. And when I talk to the witnesses, you hear their story and I like to really dig into it and analyze, everything they say, because I found out that sometimes there's even a deeper story behind some of the things they're reporting. One of the first cases I ever got in, Adam, was a case going back to like 2008 where the witness sent me a picture of something I recognized right away because it's close to my house. It was one of the markers out by our local airport, Cleveland Hopkins Airport. And I've got a background in amateur photography, and I picked up right away that what she sent me is a photograph of lens flare. Now, also, she took the photograph when she was driving down the road, which I wouldn't recommend. But when I talked to her, I'm talking to her about, her case, and she was feeling very relaxed because that's one thing I try to get the witnesses to do, feel very relaxed. And she goes, well, let me tell you about something else. And then she gets into this story that really is giving overtones of potential abduction. Huh. And I'm like, whoa. So I'm like, wow, this is even better than I hate to say the photograph of lens flare. And then we had communications over several months. She was actually keeping a diary on her experiences. And go ahead.
Are you? So I'm finding a pattern. And it's not for the full percentage of people, but a lot of people who are witnessing anything, whether it be in the sky or anything at all. They always, for the most part, they have a lot of experience prior to that witnessing that.
And you got not all of them, but a number of them do.
Right.
And in this case, it was just even more interesting when she kept her log for several months and she had a 3-year-old son. And one night she goes, Mommy, we left the house last night. She goes, what are you talking about? She goes, well, this blue man came and he took us right through the window. And I'm like, what did he say? She goes, yeah, he said a blue man took us right through the window. And I said, well, was the window open? She goes, yes, but it had a fan in it and the fan was running. Oh. And she said he took us out to this thing he called a motorcycle because, it's the communication of a 3-year-old who was trying to describe the best he could.
Right. Especially, at 3 years old, especially describing even color. You don't have a strong distinction of color till later on, right? You're just to the best of your ability of what you saw and given the lighting.
And, when I hear the story about they went through the window, they went to what he called inside of a motorcycle. And he says, these men had us down on a table and one of them hurt me, Mommy. And he showed her marks on his back. Huh. Like almost somebody had punctured him. And the part that really got me was, I said, do you let your son watch, TV? She goes, no, we don't let him watch movies, the monster movies, all that stuff, We have him geared to doing something, a 3-year-old should be seeing. But she goes, he came into my bedroom to one night carrying a book. And she goes, Mommy, this is the man that hurt me. And he was carrying the book Communion.
Oh, Whitley?
By Whitney Strieber. And it has the alien face. She goes, that's the blue man that hurt me, Mommy.
Huh. You know, that book. So I'll give you a past experience. And this is how I guess psychology could play a role. I watched a documentary, and I think it was based on that particular book. Because this is, I'm a kid, it's late 80s, and I'm watching my mom, and it's nighttime, and the dog jumped on the couch and scared the hell out of us, right? And then
they do that.
And there's another incident in my adulthood. I'm watching another movie that's geared towards a real story, about exorcisms with my Aunt Jeannie. And as we're watching, by the end of that movie, there was this unsettling feeling amongst both of us, right? So I could see how mainstream media and movies could play an effect psychologically, or even in the back of your mind, right? In your subconscious, it could play a role. These visuals.
Oh, sure.
But in this incident, this kid's 3. I don't know that he had a tremendous amount of exposure to that subject matter or those shows, right? As Mom said, she watches things geared towards him.
Right. And she says, we don't do anything. We don't allow him to see movies like that. We don't allow him to watch TV like that. So really it was keeping him away from any of those effects. And that's why it caught me so much off guard when she says, he had the book Communion and said, this is the man. And he tried to describe later on the best he could. But again, you're dealing with somebody very, very young, and they're just telling you how they interpret things.
Right.
Well, this is one of those cases that, eventually, we lost contact because I think she was concerned about, what could be happening, what was going on. And her family members were also concerned that, maybe that, we were planning things in her mind, which I wasn't. I was just basically saying, hey, tell me your experiences,
right.
Not leading them, not prompting them on things. Definitely trying to not put them in bad situations, but really just trying to dig out the facts.
Yeah, especially with kids, you can't be really invasive, right? Because they'll tend to shell up.
Right. And I think in the back of my mind, was this something really happening? What was causing this whole thing? Was even digging deeper, which I could never come up with an answer. Was it something that the mother had experienced? That she was the one who had been experiencing things first, because she told me that a number of years before that she was seeing orbs and lights over Lake Erie, on the other side of Lake Erie, probably about 20 miles from where she was at. And she'd seen those quite a bit. Well, that region, they do see a number of them, but without investigating it, I don't want to say, hey, this is definitely an alien craft. Because I have had situations where individuals out there reporting lights, and there were lights on boats, there were lights on aircraft. And that's why I like to dig into things deep, especially with the technologies we've got available right now as an investigator.
Right.
But it's just one of those cases at the end of the day that just kind of leaves you scratching your head, thinking that, are they still having experiences? Are they still going on?
That's another thing I'm finding very, very common. It appears that it's generational through family. I'm finding a lot of that. I'm not saying all cases, just a large majority. So my background, Thomas, I literally, I tell a lot of people as I interview, hopefully, it'll die down a bit when I explain myself, but I was interested in this subject as a kid. In my teens, I lost it. Became interested again in 2017 when the military started releasing their footage. And then obviously in the downtime of COVID, I had ample time to read, learn, and research and watch documentaries. And that's what has me here today. I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got kind of a similar background in that respect.
Right.
I was a kid of the 60s growing up, watching some of the shows, but I had my own experience back in the 1960s.
So you're lucky. You're lucky because I've got to see nothing, nothing. I try. Well, I tell her this. I'd really try. I look, or for the best part. But for you, you had your experience. That's you're lucky, and that I can see why it compelled you to do what you're doing. Again,
Well, it's luck, or I don't know. It's something behind it that back in the 1960s, kind of give listeners a little background. Is me and a buddy were out. We used to call it hunting, and I use that term very loosely. We lived in South Carolina at the time, over in the peach orchard side of the state. And my buddy'd come over and say, "Hey, let's go hunting today." Okay, so we'd get 12 gauge shotguns out, and we go out in the daytime. It was about 3 PM on Sunday. I remember it pretty distinctly. We're out walking through the peach orchards, and the main thing that we shot, by the way, is abandoned appliances, anything that was abandoned that didn't move. That was a fair target.
Right.
If it moved, forget it. We probably never stood a chance. So we're out hunting, and we're going back to the peach orchards. We eventually get back into the woods, and it's a very, very rural area where we're at. And as we're going back into the woods, deeper into the woods, my buddy looks around and he goes, "Hey, Tom, you hear anything?" And I look at him and say, "No, I don't hear nothing." He goes, "That's the problem. I don't hear anything." Well, he was 15 and I'm 13.
Oh, you meant like ambience. I just caught that. Like no crickets, no frogs.
No, nothing. No crickets, no frogs, no squirrels. Any wildlife you would think of wasn't there. And I didn't notice it till he pointed out. Well, this is when, the story comes up. I'm like, okay, really? He says, there's a swamp willie back here. And he's basically describing a Bigfoot. Well, I didn't know a whole lot about Bigfoot other than like reading about him in a couple books.
Right.
Well, he starts getting scared. And he goes, that swamp willie resides back here. It lives back here. Well, instead of getting out of the woods, he starts running deeper into the woods. And he picks up his pace. He's not walking. He starts almost running in the wrong direction from our houses. So we're going deeper and deeper and deeper back into the woods. Again, no sounds anywhere. And that's when I looked up and I saw a disc-shaped UFO basically brushing the treetops. It was that low. It was silver, no windows, no nothing like that, no features, just a disc-shaped object low enough to brush the treetops. And as we're going through the woods, it's following us. So here this thing is only about 40 feet high. I look up, I see it. For some reason, Adam, I never tell him to look up. I just look up, I see it, I look at him running, I look up, I see it, I look at him, back and forth, up and down, up and down, up and down. And he picks his pace up, so he's basically running to try to get out of the woods. I never tell him the whole time, "Hey, look up, man, look at this thing." We eventually hit a road, and to kind of give you an idea how rural it was, the dirt-covered roads had a layer of oil sprayed on to keep the dust down. That was the type of road we eventually hit.
Huh.
So as we get out to the road, we start walking back because he doesn't want to go through the woods. He's scared to death to go in the woods. All of a sudden, the story comes out. He goes, "Did you see that big white owl standing in front of us?" I said, "What are you talking about, a white owl?" He said, "This thing in emotions was about 4 feet tall, standing right in front of us and had these big, huge black eyes on it looking at us." I said, "I didn't see an owl. The whole way home, all I heard was owl, white owl, big owl, 4 foot tall, standing right in front of us, nonstop the whole way home," which was probably about 4 miles by the time he got home. And I never told him about the UFO. So he saw something I didn't. I saw something that I just never showed to him. Well, I've tried to reach out to him. I tried to find him for years. And I couldn't track him down until not long ago when I found out that he passed away about 2 years after I left. He was run down by a car. Now, This brings up story number 2.
Before you go to story 2, I hear, so for you with the UFO, looking up, looking down, why didn't you say anything? I have something similar. If I see, like, again, the only thing I've ever witnessed was, and I described it multiple times, it's like this blue orb, but it was a thunderstorm. There was like dead center of this thunderstorm. and it didn't move. It just got consumed by the storm. So I was left to wonder, right? And, you know, for me, there's this thing where I default to logic. And in my mind, I live relevantly close to an airport. It could have been a drone, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately for me, the storm consumed it, and I'll never know. But in your case, it could be the same. Like your computer, which is your brain, saw that, and you're trying to process it. And what happens is you go through this moment. It's not maybe that you didn't want to tell them, that perhaps maybe your computer is trying to process in a default to logic sense, right? What was this? Not to mention, I hear a lot of, it's very parallel with the owl. I've heard that a few times now. And it's very parallel with the sightings of the Bigfoot. To be honest, it's not impossible that we cannot perceive what it is we're seeing. Bearing in mind, these entities probably have a greater technology. Not probably, they do. From what our military is recording, there's no doubt they're far superior. But that also means we may not be able to perceive exactly what it is that we're seeing in a whole. We can get the parts of it, and then our brain in that default sense is trying to make sense of what we're seeing, allowing us to come up with some logical answer on the spot, right? So, right. Yeah, for you, for that experience, that entire one, I'm that guy, and I said this a lot in podcasts. I run at the thing. Whatever it is, I have to. I got to know. It's going to get me in trouble one day, because eventually I want to get out there and do a documentary, and if I do benefit or get lucky enough to see something, I'm probably going to be that guy that gets in knowledge, because I'm going to run right at it. I got to know, and I'm going to document it while I'm doing it. But for your story, yeah, I think just hearing you say that lets me know that you're seeing that object, and you're trying to default to logic. Your computer was trying to work that out. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, see, once we got back, we never talked about that thing. We never talked about what happened after that. Neither one of us. He never talked about the owl after that day. I never talked about the UFO. It was about a few weeks after that, my family moved back to Ohio, where I'm at now. But as I was saying, part two of the story, this is where it seems like, man, he's read too many books and stuff. Well, I didn't read books at that time about this stuff. I knew nothing about this until later on. I started really digging into it. But in part two, I'd also had, around that same time, bouts of sleep paralysis, almost on a nightly basis. And these bouts were getting extremely intense. They began about roughly 2 years before that the sleep paralysis, a fear that something was coming, of which for years I looked back at those incidents and kind of attributed to, you know, the monster under the bed type thing of a kid, and just kind of like blew it off. Well, 2 weeks after, you know, we had our encounter, I'd had the sleep paralysis going on. I had feelings that, you know, as I was leaving the room, which, you know, sleep paralysis can be attributed to a number of things. Well, one night we decided to go up to a nearby gas station after dark. They were open late, and I think we probably went about 9 o'clock or so. We walked up the road about a half mile or so. That was one of the closest things around. We're going to get soda. We get our soda. We're on our way back. We're walking down this, again, dirt road that there's no ambient light out there at all, except for maybe a couple distant security lights. Was we're walking back, we hear a car coming, and this car is coming behind us, and we can hear it getting closer, but when we turn around and look, there's absolutely no headlights. Well, it's getting close, and it's like, man, this thing is really getting, let's get off the road, man. So we ran off the road, we ran up, there's like some kudzu vines around, which is a really dense foliage. We kind of get through those the best we can. We run up into a peach orchard, and this car comes down into the ditch, goes up the berm, trying to get into the peach orchard after us until it can't get any farther in. And it swerves down the road and takes off. And this is where the story sounds really hokey. It was a black Ford Galaxy, mid-1960s model. Huh. And I'd never read about Men in Black and never read about any of that stuff back then. Never doing anything about it. And that Ford kept coming back, by the way, for just about a week every night, pulling into my drive, not his. We lived across from each other. it pulled in my drive, which shined its lights in my house, and my mother's the only one home. And she would never call the sheriff or anybody down there, notify any police or anything like that. We just let it happen. But this went on until we left. And here's the part about my buddy. I eventually found out not long ago he passed away. He was killed when he was run down by a car.
Oh, did you get the description of the car?
2 years after I left. No, there was nothing there.
That's creepy.
He was killed. That was it. Yeah, and I'm thinking, whoa, was this something that continued on after I left?
Yeah.
And why? You know,
perhaps he was a selected party, and you happen to be there. And on, you know, that's another thing. I've been reading a lot of files, as many as I can, and there's a lot of people that the party selected would be the one seeing it mostly, and then when someone else, it's like anything else. If someone else finally acknowledged it or saw it, and I guess you have no choice, right? You're in it. You saw us, too late,
right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because back then I never said a word to anybody about it. I don't know if he did his family, but I never told a word to my parents because I thought, man, they're going to think I'm nuts. My buddy sees a 4-foot owl in the woods. I see a UFO flying above the treetops. You know, they're going to think I'm Looney Tunes at that time. So I just kept my mouth shut and just kind of hid that story all these years.
Yeah, I mean, I get why. I mean, you know, think about this. So you're out there in the woods, and it almost feels like something's playing to your fears, right? And again, if this is an advanced technology, and we're having a tough time perceiving what it is or what it wants us to see, etc., you're not entirely sure. Like, again, your experience and his experience might be two different things, you know? I have a lot of theory. Again, everything I say or think in this show, this is not science. This is just my theory. So based upon everything I've read or you know, shows I've watched, like the reptilians, I hear that a lot. And I honestly have to believe that an advanced alien technology, if they're going to do something invasive to you that you're going to find displeasing, maybe they gave you that perception that they were reptilian so you could associate separate incidents with separate entities, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of, I make room for a lot of ideas like that. I always compare everything to our military. How would we operate if we were doing things covertly? You know, and to bounce it off you, and you'll hear it, I don't know if you heard on the other podcast yet or not, but, you know, I have this theory that the Greys are an advanced robot that has a consciousness uploaded and or an advanced AI, you know, given what because again, if I think we're under a long-term study. I said this in every show. I know I'm going to slow this down eventually, but I really think we're under a long-term study because the same could be said, and I say this a lot too, but if you see ants, like we're walking around a park, we see ants driving cars and flying planes. They're using anything advanced like that. We're closing that park off and studying that long-term. Mm-hmm. We're going to want to see the evolution of that. So that being said, what do you think the Gray is personally? I mean, I understand how MUFON and everyone has like this rolling theory and there's like protocol, but what do you personally think they are?
Well, see, this is where my story goes even deeper.
Pray tell.
Because what I did is I brushed that stuff off for years, but kind of like you, I got away from it. I started reading a lot of things. I read everything I could get, every book I could get. And I pretty much focused on that because you didn't have internet back then. So it was my only resource. I also started getting into sci-fi a lot. And I eventually got to a point I had to put everything away because I got married, had kids, but now they're grown and gone out on their own. And now it's kind of like me time again. And I jokingly tell people I went through midlife crisis and I wanted to find something to fill the extra time I started to have.
Right. So
that's when I got into MUFON and also another local group that we had, the Cleveland Ufology Project, which has been around since 1952.
Huh. What's that project?
The Cleveland Ufology Project. They have a long history.
Yeah, you'll have to share a file or something with me to research that. That's the first I'm hearing of that.
Well, there's a number of groups that's been in Ohio going way back to like the 50s, 60s, 70s and stuff. And I also do archiving, collect archival information on UFOs, old newsletters, old documents, old reports, stuff like that. Well, I got involved with them. In one of our meetings, I was talking to one of my friends, Aaron Clark, and I was telling him about my experience because I'd never told anybody about it before, and he was one of the first. And he goes, I think there's more to this. So he calls up one of our, a former MUFON person who did regressions. And he set me up with her to do a regression because coincidentally, we are also going to be doing a meeting on abduction.
When you're saying regression, you're referring to hypnosis?
Yes.
Okay.
So what we were doing is also, I thought it's great because I'm doing investigations. I want to know what, regressions are all about. Also, we're going to be doing a meeting where we invite a number of individuals who said that they were abducted in, and we're going to let them tell their stories. No judging, nothing like that. Just we wanted to hear their stories. And I thought, what better way to experience the whole thing, go through regressions and really go through the whole experience. So I went out, met with the person who did the regression. She hypnotized me basically, which I didn't know if it would work or not. And when we got done, we had an audio tape that I kept of the whole thing. We eventually did 3 regressions. And she was sitting on the floor and she was just staring into space. And she goes, I've never had so much come out in one time. She goes, we went 1.5 to 2 hours on the first session. And what came out is we went back to a point of where those experiences were all centered around is going into, the sleep paralysis, the experiences and so forth in the woods and all these things. And it came out that there was an encounter with the Greys.
Huh. So your time in the woods wasn't fully accounted then?
Well, that wasn't the only experience. We found out there are quite a few experiences going on for several years. And that was one of the ones we just focused on for this. And one of my concerns as an investigator was, I hope she's not leading me. Well, none of the questions were a leading question because I've got tapes of other individuals who have done regressions who they talk to the witness on her Adam and they go, tell me about this gray alien you saw. Oh yeah, it was gray. It was about 4 foot tall, wasn't it? Yeah, it was about 4 foot tall.
I'd say it's like a coercing, like an admission.
Yeah. You know where I'm going. Where I'm going. I mean, they led the individual every step of the way. Well, all she did is she says, let's go back to a time frame back in the 1960s. Back in that area in South Carolina where you had this experience in the woods. And she just put me there. And then that's when I took off and just started rolling. So we did that one. Then we went back and did a second session. And during the second session, I was in a room. You mentioned that these Greys were somewhat robotic, getting back to your earlier comment. Right. I remember looking around in the room, and I've heard this from other individuals too, where I see what appears to be a Grey standing on the other side of the room, a far side of the room, and it's just a straight room with no features at all. I'm laying down flat. I can't see anything in the room. And I get the impression that this entity is just basically standing almost like on guard. It's just standing there like very robotic, no emotions, just standing there watching me.
Yeah, this is going to be the first time I say this on this podcast. It's on my website. But one of the theories I have rolling with the Greys as well, again, not that you can't distinct them from one another. No expressions. They're very, very cold like. And people often confuse when you see advanced robotics, it can't be confused with something metallic. It could have like a skin-like texture to it, considering what we're doing now. But the eyes of the Grey, I strongly think those are some kind of sensor, right? If you really define what people, like even the way to communicate, everyone's like, well, it could be that they're using telepathy, or it could be their form of Bluetooth. Because again, years ago, before Bluetooth, we would assume telepathy, but because of the advent of Bluetooth, we now know we can communicate without, again, I guess based on what Elon's doing. He's going to put this chip in people's brains. You can communicate, just send messages, someone completely silent in that sense. But But the grays, the eyes, I have to believe those are sensors. And who knows what kind of sensors. It could sense anything from infrared. It could be X-ray like. I mean, it could be, those are large eyes. You could look how sensors are in our equipment today. You could fit a lot in that. So
sure. I mean,
what does this do to you when you learn this though? What role does this play on you psychologically?
Well, when, we're doing the regression, and especially some of the things that came out, because there's one of the points where there was an entity right in my face. And the comparison I make to it is, I picture, one of my doctors years ago used to put one of those like mirror things on his head. He'd get right up in your face and, examine you. This thing was that close, doing the same thing. But all of a sudden I started going on, Adam, something went wrong, because what happened, and this goes back to, your comment about, is it extrasensory, extrasensory skills? Is it like Bluetooth?
Right.
This thing is looking in my eyes, and all of a sudden, I mean, all these experiences I'd had up to this point, I couldn't move. But then all of a sudden, I could see inside of its mind. And I felt like I tapped into a hive, that I could sense not where it was, but thousands of these things. It was just like opening the universe up at that point.
Well,
so
yeah.
It's like I tapped in, and I didn't get a sensation that it was an emotional thing like, oh crap, what happened? It's not supposed to do this. I sensed that, it was basically emotionless, going, this connection is not supposed to happen. And it was trying to do everything it could to basically disconnect me from, almost like the comparison you made to like Bluetooth, like basically turn me off, and it couldn't.
Yeah.
And I could move, I could get up, I could move around. It was doing everything it could to make me lay back down. It had no control.
We don't understand enough about what energy wavelengths are, or sound waves. Like I get tinnitus, and you know how that could be very profound on your hearing. It's very loud ringing.
Mm-hmm.
And I find when you have like inner ear congestion or anything with your inner ears, the way sounds are, the way it affects that, the way even like high pitched noises you typically can't hear, you could almost hear with those scenarios. We're not sure what they're using. I mean, and if they were able to tap into your mind, or you got into their mind, you could have a pre-existing inner ear issue that allowed you to do that, essentially, right? I mean, it could be something as simple as that, and/or it's unknown. I make room for a lot. I have very little doubt in anything. I'm one of those people. Until I have proof or disproof, I just have to accept it for what it is and take the information in.
Well, see, after that experience, though, I felt that they kept trying to shut me down for some time. That was a challenge, at the link that they were just trying to break, and they could not break it. And it took some time to eventually break that link, but it's not completely gone.
Huh.
This is where I think at times I get extremely intense when I do investigations. That I'm digging in. I know certain cases there's nothing there that has an explainable explanation. And if I dig enough, I will find stuff. And I don't say I'm like a Philip Klass who's going out and creating scenarios.
Right. But you're more relatable for people that have experiences.
Yeah. And I'm going back and saying, okay, if it's an aircraft, let's see if we can find that aircraft. And what I do, it's like, okay, here it is. Now also prove it, not just one way, but multiple ways. Go back, like we had sightings over Lake Erie that were aircraft. Well, I had them on my flight tracking software. I contacted pilots from Delta. They told me their exact flight path, where to come in at, where to turn at. We had multiple investigators along the lakefront documenting these lights on the nights they were seeing and going back, and everything was proven like 3 to 4 different ways. So I get very intense, but there's some of these cases that pop up out of the woodwork that when they come, it's like, whoa. And I still am intense when I do my investigations, but at times I have other sensations going along with it. One of the first times that I did did this was with that it happened was with a case. I was actually working with the case assistance group of MUFON at that time, doing a case in Puerto Rico, long distance, where a witness had reported lights in the sky, basically that they were driving down the road and some lights in the sky were basically following them down the road. They'd pulled into their mother's house and said, "Hey, these lights are following me." The mother didn't believe him until that person left the mother's house, go driving down the road, and the lights took off and followed him again. Well, that was what came in with the MUFON report. But I was telling you earlier, I like to talk to the witness and get them to feel relaxed. Once we started talking, they said, "Well, let me tell you about something else." She goes, "Me and my mother and my grandmother have all had experiences in the past with things like UFOs." So here goes back to that connection of multi-generations you were talking about earlier. Before she says another word, she goes, "Let me tell you about something else." She doesn't start the description, but all of a sudden, here's this vision, like I'm sitting right in front of my computer screen right now. I've got this vision of somebody sitting in a dark room at night, looking straight ahead. They're sitting on what appears to me maybe something like a sofa. There's all these windows going across the opposite side of the room, stretching from one wall to the other wall. There's ambient light coming in from the outside. It's like moonlight, starlight. That's all the light they have coming in. In front of the windows, something is standing in front of the window, silhouetted. You can't make out any features, but something was really unusual about it. Was this figure, whatever it was, that was visualizing, was not tall, but also was not the same height as the room that the witness was sitting in. It appeared to be short in stature, but based on its features, it appeared to be lower than the normal room height. So she tells me about the first instance. She goes, "Now let me tell you about something else." And she starts talking about being in her room at night, sitting on a sofa, looking at the windows in front of her. And I didn't lead her on anything like this. I'm just letting this whole thing play out like a movie in front of me. She starts describing everything I'd already seen before she ever said a word. And I said, "Well, give me some more details about your room." She goes, "Well, I was sitting on a sofa." She goes, "I'm looking at the windows. The windows," I said, describe the windows for me, if you would." She goes, "Well, the windows go from one wall to the other wall, basically. They stretch completely across the room. And the light's coming in from the outside. And I can see something silhouetted in front of the windows." Everything I'd seen. And I said, "Give me more details, about your room, everything, the layout and stuff like that." She goes, "Well, this creature was standing in front of the windows, and where I'm at, if you take and go forward, you have to step down a couple steps. It goes into another level about 2 to 3 steps down. And that's another part of the room, and that's where this entity, as she called it, was standing at." So I visualized not only this entity silhouetted in the windows, I also visualized that this figure was lower, standing at a lower level than the room she was in.
I don't know.
And I'm like, how did I see that? And the only thing, again, it's connecting the dots that I want to be very careful in doing, but it makes me think that there's a residual effect left over from my earlier experiences that was never gone. That here she had what I see as, most likely a true case, that she wasn't lying. She was describing everything the way she was seeing it. And if it was factual that her mother and her grandmother all had experiences, maybe there's a connection between us because of those experiences. And I was able to tap into her mind and see the things before she ever described it.
It's hard. It's harsh because in that scenario, you're having a shared, not even a shared experience, but a shared, I guess, what's the best way to say that? Like vision?
She's Yeah, she's sharing the vision without knowing it.
Huh.
I've tapped in and she doesn't know it. She doesn't. I'm just sitting back, just, kind of like, just tell me the facts, ma'am. Sergeant Joe Friday, just tell me the facts. But all the facts I'd seen before she ever said a word.
It kind of puts you in a unique position in investigating, anyhow, right?
It's something that can't be turned on and off like a light switch.
Right.
It's like when these cases pop up that, it appears to be something that's really there. There's something solid. That witness had an experience. It seems to be when the connection comes into play.
I kind of want to reference the whole idea of it, their version of Bluetooth. And if you think how Bluetooth works, unless there's another parable or device like it nearby, it doesn't work, right? So
right.
Perhaps with you, again, unclear of what causes that with you, but perhaps you get near someone who has, I guess, their Bluetooth and it's available, right? I mean, that's the best way I could explain it.
And that's why I'm not saying that, the grays are an entity. I don't know. I don't have enough facts. Could they be robotic or something along those lines, or something bio-developed?
Right.
Possibly.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what AI is going to be capable of moving forward, you hear people like Elon, people like other scientists, they really want there to be caution exercised with AI taking off on its own, right?
Definitely.
And they're definitely right about that. You don't need, especially something that's going to behave in a calculating manner, minus empathy and so on. As far as the grays and the robotics, I think they are. I mean, again, when you think of something robotic and has an uploadable, downloadable consciousness, the entities that created that can almost avatar the bodies of these grays, right? And they're not going to show expressions because there's no need. That's a piece of machinery, right? As technology progresses, and I'm going to be honest, everything again with me is not science. I have a wild imagination. I'm trying to satisfy a childhood curiosity. And as movies, even in the movies, as you see how movie ideas come out, a lot of ideas from movies later on become today's technology. That's the truth. We base that fiction into a technology. So we're not sure what it is that they have or don't have. I mean, again, not to reference the military, what we recorded, what we saw, that defies what we know as far as aeronautics, period. So how they're doing that, there's a lot of speculation. I don't know if they're shifting portals or they're moving through different states of time, because I've heard several people speak of it about they go in and forward and around time differently, and so we're not clear on it. And what you have going on, I don't know. That's a mystery in itself, and it's unique, right? And for you as an investigator, when sharing that experience with people that are I imagine when you first talk to them, you don't make that aware yet, but that puts you in a position where you could be more relatable.
Exactly. I think I feel, a little bit more sympathy for the, witness what they've gone through.
Yeah, because you can't just go tell the cops, right?
No. And this has happened several different times. It's not, like I say, I can't turn it on and off like a light switch. But it's when certain individuals have very strong connections that it's almost like you can tap into that connection.
Yeah. So what for you, you spoke to paralysis earlier. I could tolerate a lot. If I woke up tonight, alien in my room, I'm okay with it. I can deal with that. It's a physical entity. Ghost, I repeat this a lot. I don't know if I can tolerate that, because a ghost could sit there and sing the worst song in the world over and over again. You could do squat. There's nothing you can do about it, right?
Right.
But for me, the paralysis, that would trouble me, because that's why I never got into drugs. I don't like anything that I cannot control. I don't want to lose control of my sensory or my body. That would scare me. And then overmore, if you're paralyzed in an entity, look, if you're paralyzed and a 3-year-old walks in with a spoon, I'm concerned, because you're paralyzed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I went through it, and I basically brushed all those things off in the back of my mind for years, and never thought a thing about them until I started getting more into this, and a lot of memories started coming back. I mean, at that time, I was going through the sleep paralysis. I started the kind of like the comparison you make is kind of like the monsters in the room type of thing,
Yeah, like a night terror almost.
Yeah, I started looking around the room because I knew something was coming almost every night. So I do the things. I'd look in the closets, look under the bed. I even got to the point that I was taking sheets, anything along those lines, and I was putting it around the outside of my curtains to block every tiny bit of way anything could possibly see in through the corners of the windows. I was getting that paranoid that something was coming after all this was happening. And I don't know why my parents never noticed anything like it. Maybe just thought I was just a nutty kid. I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes parents are just dismissed. Like, look, he'll grow out of it.
But this went on for a number of years.
I know I had night terrors as a kid. I remember that as a kid. But as I got older, I became that weirdo. When I hear something in the house, I got to go see it. And I don't think I become aggressive. I don't want to say I become aggressive. I don't know. I'm just not one of those people that's something in the dark is unexplainable. I got to go know what that is, or else, there's that thing I do where I start running through logic. All right, what could this be? Was it a neighbor? Did a neighbor come home? Perhaps is the door not all the way closed? Like, I do those things, or else it'll make me nuts, keep me up all night.
Well, and that's what, when I do my investigations, there's certain things that bug me when I'm doing my research. It's like, okay, let's go back to the computer. Let's go back and do this. Well, after they did the regressions, that was one of the things that started bugging me. Is I started playing some of the regression tapes over, and we did, like I say, we did 3 of them, and it was total of about 7 hours, something like that, maybe combined. And on one of the regressions, she even brought me out of it early because my heart rate started racing. She could hear my breathing going completely nuts. And not being a kid anymore, I think she was actually getting concerned I could actually have a heart attack. Yeah. Because of the way I was starting to go. And she brought me out.
Yeah, your mind's incredibly strong in the way it influences your body. So she's within it right there.
Yeah, and after, those regressions, one night I was on a computer at home doing some research on investigations, and it really started bugging me. What this entity in front of me that I remembered seeing in this room, whatever the room was. I started going through the internet, searching for images. I'm going through image after image after image, and finally I find one that, oh no, this is it. But it's not quite it. And I started playing with Photoshop, modifying the image, changing the image around, changing the colors. All of a sudden, for some reason, I said, there's one thing that's not quite right. It doesn't seem like it's on the right side. Well, I mirrored the image and flipped it over to the opposite direction. And I lost it. I was sitting at my computer and I started basically crying because I said, that's it. On board, I won't say on board at all, but in this room, wherever I was at, I remember this grade I was looking at. The grade I was looking at, really, there was actually 2 of them. Close. One I remembered seeing, and the other one I didn't remember seeing. When I flipped it to the mirror image, that's why I lost it, because the second one was the one leading the whatever they were doing. I don't want to say examination because I have no idea what they were really doing. Right. And almost everything appeared to be mental that they were doing. No physical examination at all as far as instruments or anything like that.
Which leads me to that theory in the eyes. I have to believe those are scanners. I've heard what you're telling me now. I've read a lot. I've seen it in a lot of different studies. I saw it in a lot of documentaries. I have to believe the eyes are multiple scanners behind that. I mean, it makes sense. Like I also hear like the bodies are frail. They don't look very, but you realize how strong robots could be. They don't need mass to be strong, right? It's especially when you think of look how strong carbon fiber is, and it's relevantly thin, and it's strong. I have a pool cue and the shaft's made of carbon fiber. It's remarkably strong. So based on what you're telling me, with the way their behaviors, yeah, I think that if I had to guess, they're scanning or using the
You know,
eyes for something extra sensory.
and it's possible because I tell people I don't really know. All I can tell them is what, tell people is what my experiences were. And I just can't remember. I can't forget that data. I mean, I was just breaking down at the computer like, that's it. There's actually two of them there. And for some reason, I was blocking the one out of my mind. Like it was created such an experience, I didn't want to remember it.
Right.
Type of a thing.
Yeah, that happens with any horrific thing in your life, Again, for as many times I hear about the cold stare of these beings, it still leads me back to that's got to be scanners in the eye. In any experience you've had so far, did you feel like a victim?
No.
Yeah, because
I just feel like whatever was going on, I was just caught up like right in the middle of it.
Right.
I don't feel necessarily that anything was out there to potentially harm me.
So,
or at least intentionally harm me. I was just kind of like, I guess maybe the best comparison would be it's almost like the deer being tagged, that
right.
was being brought in, looked at, and okay, let's put him back out in the wild now, and we'll check back on him after this, maybe.
Is there any pattern with people who are experienced, maybe of their DNA or their blood type? Are they being selected by any particular means?
I've heard different ones claim that there is, but I'd want to see more evidence to that because we had one guy in our area up here that kept claiming over and over again that he's got an alien blood, that they can't do surgeries on him because his blood is an alien blood. And it's like, yeah, but you're giving me all these great stories, but you're showing me no substance.
Yeah, I would be curious to have like a DNA database for people of experience, right? I don't call them abductees because that sounds like you're making them a victim. Not everyone shares the same experience,
right? Exactly.
So I would like to see a database collection on that. I think that would prove. I would find it interesting. Two, if you find patterns, because for me, patterns play a huge role in everything. And I imagine if they find some sort of pattern, maybe that would kind of answer the question of why they're here initially. Maybe.
They may be a pattern there, but on the other hand, if you think about doing experimentation, you always get control samples.
That's true.
So there's always those that don't fit maybe that pattern.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
still reaching out to.
Yeah, they're still.
But you may distinctly find something there though. That okay, these fall within a certain range and these don't.
Yeah, that's got my interest now. Eventually, I'm going to start reaching out to more people of experience, and I'm going to, I don't know, kind of like take my own notes down and find the patterns that I could that emerge. A lot so far, generational sounds strong. Definitely people who have seen things in their youth have more experiences later on. So, I mean, there's a pattern there. I guess your experience has compelled you to go work alongside a MUFON, yeah?
Well, it really helps, I think, with the investigations, but really it's something that I enjoy doing because I'm a techie type person. Like I say, very analytical. And a lot of the reports we get in at MUFON, to be very honest, are typically lights in the sky, where somebody may be seeing an aircraft, somebody may be seeing a satellite. The one I always hate to tell people is, you just saw Venus.
Yeah.
But it still happens to this day without a doubt. And we have to be honest with ourselves and accept the facts. If there are things that have explanations, accept it.
Right.
Because otherwise, people start claiming a lot of stuff that's not.
Yeah, I'm not, for me, it's not
then
good.
You start putting all this.
Like I was telling you, that orb I saw, that's not good enough for me. You know what I mean? I know that it had like a bluish aqua color, but then there's this thing with my computer, my brain again, where it's defaulting logic, and it's in a storm cloud. Did the light change because of the clouds around it? Is it, you know what I mean? Like I do this default thing.
And you're being logical about it. You have to. It's
torture too, because then I wonder, like I'm still talking about this. It's well after the fact. I'm like, And that's not even a
Sure.
wonderful thing that I saw. It didn't move, didn't do anything fantastic. So I'm stuck with that. Before we close, let's discuss a case that you came across where the people were having a very unpleasant outcome.
Okay, now here's one. I did a Star Team case that came in back 2014. I got a phone call saying that, here's a case coming in. It's not even officially written up report yet. It involved two fishermen at a state park who were out fishing. And I always automatically almost think of, are they getting their story from some of these other ones that have experienced this, like Pascagoula and so forth on here? So I'm cautious about those things. Well, the case comes in. The individuals were out at the state park. They'd had the same fishing hole for roughly about 2 years. Two individuals, one about 19, the other one in his 40s. They'd gone out every weekend that the weather was decent, year round. The wife and the girlfriend tolerated that. They had a spot that they had cell phone communication. When they went out, they had the same habits all the time. They'd set up a canopy. They'd put their coolers under a canopy, which they claimed that they only had water to drink. They didn't drink alcohols of any sort. They started a campfire. They'd actually play a game where they put wood on the campfire every half hour, and they would jokingly guess at how close they were to half-hour increments all night long while they're out fishing. They rebaited their hook every 30 minutes. They put glow sticks on their fishing poles and hung them over the water and sat in lawn chairs all night long.
That's an interesting. I've never heard as an indicator that something's on the hook.
Yeah,
that's clever.
Like you see the pole, yeah.
I've never seen that before.
And they had this habit. So the wife and the girlfriend actually would call them throughout the night to check on them to make sure they were okay and see how things were going. I mean, these women were tolerant of these guys' experiences. Well, on one given night, and this goes back to like August 29th of 2014, they're out there on a Friday night. They have everything all set up, routine going on just like normal. And about 10:30, they see this light going across the sky in the north, low on the horizon above the treetops, and it appeared to be just smaller than the moon. But I asked them, if you held like a nickel or quarter as arm's length, is it the same size or bigger? And they said, bigger. Well, they see this object low on the horizon. They actually walk out along the edge of the water as far as they can get to get a better view. And this thing is just drifting slowly across the sky. It's still in view, but then for some reason they said, oh, let's go back to fishing. So that was at 10:30. 11:30, another set of lights come by, and this one goes more directly overhead. They watch it for a while, and again, same thing, right back to fishing. So they've been doing this thing about the wood in the fire every half hour. It's 1:30. Is it time to put a wood in the fire? Nope, not time yet. We got a few more minutes yet. They hear this shrill cry coming out of the woods that sounds like a shrill woman's cry. Well, that area, on a side note, has some of the highest concentration of Bigfoot sightings in the state of Ohio. It's a major state park in the southern part of the state. Well, one of my buddies who's in the Bigfoot says, that's Bigfoot. That's Bigfoot. Okay, I want more evidence behind that. So I just made a note, shrill woman's cry. It freaked them out so bad, though. Here's the thing about that. They've been fishing that same hole for several years. That one sound freaked them out so bad, they said he almost packed everything up, threw it in a pickup truck, and drove home. And the guy said when he drove, the 40-year-old says, when I drive, I go 80 miles an hour the whole way. That's my speed I drive at.
Huh.
They didn't leave at that point. They kept on fishing. Then the 40-year-old is sitting his lawn chair, watching his glow stick on the pole. 19-year-old is up baiting his hook. They haven't put wood on the fire yet. They got a few more minutes. All of a sudden, the 40-year-old looks around and says, something's wrong. Something's not right here. Pulls his cell phone out, and it's 5:19 in the morning.
Wow.
He doesn't remember anything.
So they lost all that time.
Right. What got him intense to begin with is he is very time management, a big time management freak.
Right.
He was going ballistic that he couldn't figure out what happened for like 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah, that would bother me. Right? Time loss?
He threw everything in a pickup truck at that point. They changed their clothes, threw everything in the truck, and flew back and basically drove 80 miles an hour all the way home. They had about 80 miles probably to drive home. They get home, they don't know what to do during the day, so they're trying to figure out somebody who can help them. So they contacted MUFON. And that's when I got involved. And as the case is coming in, I went in and pulled flight data records for the times that they talked about. And at 10:30, there was nothing close in that area. At 11:30, there's actually a Quest Medical Technology plane flying directly overhead. So I think that was an explanation for the second set of lights.
Huh.
I also pulled other records. I went on the LinkedIn website, found out what they did for a living, confirming that. I checked their Facebook page out to see what they did, to see if they'd posted anything on UFOs, anything like that related, to which I found nothing.
Right.
I got a hold of them. We reviewed the whole story over the phone. And I said, would you go back down to the state park tonight, the next night? I want to reenact everything you did. So we got down there about dark. We got everything sent up. Everything was still in their car from earlier, or truck from earlier. And the guy says, well, I don't drink. Well, I popped his cooler open and all he had in there was bottled water, like he said. Also, I noticed on his hand at the same time, he had an unusual tattoo. And I said, what's the tattoo for? He said, well, I made a change in my life because I didn't like the direction I was going for a while. So I made a change, and that represents my change in life. We'll give you an idea how deep I dug. I knew I was going down there with these individuals by myself. So I looked at dockets for the heck of it and saw a number of years before that, he may have had an issue with alcohol, hence the change in life.
Right. Yeah, that's
and with the trade he was in, that's consistent, kind of consistent, that trade. Well, we went down, reenacted everything. And these guys were just like they were wired. I mean, they were terrified to go back down there.
Yeah, I would be too. Like,
and it was
the time thing. Like, I don't know, if aliens came to the house, I would be like, hey, I won't tell anyone. Don't wipe the brain. Let me know what happens. Yeah. Or maybe it's so unpleasant we don't want to know. I don't know, but I guess I'm going to find out, right? Or I would have anyway.
Right. Well, we reenacted everything. They went to everything that night. Even the wife and girlfriend was there with them, and I talked to them separately too. And they said, "Oh yeah, he's a time management freak. If he's at some place 5 minutes late, he's ballistic. He's 5 minutes late."
Yeah, I could see what I would play a nasty effect.
I called them during the week, and they were too terrified to even go to work. They all lived in the same house. They were too terrified to go to work. They didn't go to work for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they wouldn't go outside after dark. They had to be back before dark. Interestingly enough, that night that we did the reenactment, when we drove back, the guy drove all the way down 80 miles an hour, like he said. On the way back, as we're driving back, there's a cell phone tower directly in front of us with this beacon flashing over and over again. He sees the beacon and he slows down to about 40 miles an hour without knowing it. Once we're past the beacon, he sped up. And what appeared to be there was a connection between that light of the beacon and maybe the light he saw at 10:30.
Yeah, his computer, his brain was trying to, some sort of association with it, right?
Yeah. And I asked him about it later on, and he didn't even know he slowed down at all. He says, no, I went 80 the whole way home. Said, no, you didn't. You slowed down.
Yeah, I read a story where this guy lost his mind. Like he worked for a lab, doing some form of research, nothing really, I can't remember what it was, but he ended up losing his job. He became super paranoid. He boarded his house. I think he bought dogs. I don't know. I think his life came undone. So not everyone has a great experience or even the same one, right?
Right. And I don't know what his experience was at that point because we talked a few times. As a matter of fact, the following weekend, or even going backing up a little bit, the night that we did the reenactment, as I'm down there, I'm going around the campgrounds with them in their area where they're at, and I felt some unusual sensations. And what happens is my body just kind of lights up, almost like it's on fire.
Yeah, I read that too now. Someone else said something. They get like not hot flashes, but their skin feels warm, like their ears feel warm.
Right. This was my entire body, and I sensed something was there, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And this 19-year-old, he was like Barney Fife. He was like bouncing off all over the walls. He was just any little tiny snap in the woods. He was freaking out. Huh. And I'm thinking, if you'd been down there for 2 years, that wouldn't happen. You should be immune to love, like little cracks in the woods and stuff like that.
Yeah, something had a profound effect on him.
I went back down the following weekend because they said they weren't there, and I was going to call their bluff. So I drove down the following weekend at 2 a.m. So I'm walking the state park by myself at 2 a.m. And I don't carry firearms. I'm like, if something's going to get me, it's going to get me. What can I do?
Right.
So I'm walking around the state park. I got, as I'm going around the region they're at, they weren't there. A lot of things that they said was going on that on the other side of the lake, there were other fishermen over there. I could see their lanterns. I started walking around, not where they were at, but also other regions around the park. And I got to a point that here I'm like at this point about 3 to 4 in the morning. I've got a flashlight along with some other instruments along with me, EMF detectors and so forth. And all of a sudden I hit the spot. I'm going, damn, whatever happened right where I'm at. Something happened here. I don't know what it is. I looked down and I was standing in a perfect circle of burnt grass, not from like campfires and stuff like that, but the grass was completely dead. So I'm like, something happened here. I don't know what it is. My body was just like lighting up all over the place. So I took samples, soil samples around the region. I took soil samples for that area. I took soil samples in control areas outside of it and marked them all. I was supposed to send them to MUFON. I didn't, by the way, because one of my friends actually I knew was going to be doing the analysis at the end anyway. And she only lives 30 miles from me, so I took the samples directly to her. Also, I got the fisherman's clothing that they had on that night and took that with me also. When I gave her the soil samples, I told her to look specifically for higher iron content in the soil because that was something I was told to look for. When she got the analysis back, she did spectroscopic analysis. She said, do you have a map to put these with? I said, sure I do, but I didn't give it to you intentionally. When we laid the map out, we found extremely high iron contents in the soil in the spots I was standing in. And when you got farther away from that region, they gradually dissipated and dropped way down.
It's like one of the stories I read about the craft. It wasn't admitting. It was like maybe like a molten type metal was spilling from it. I guess they said.
Well, there was one that you have to be careful of. She actually did the same analysis on that. I think she did analysis on that case was in Southern Ohio.
Also. Yeah, that's exactly what I read.
Benny Hoggins, I think is the name of the case. And I don't think that's quite accurate, some of the stuff. John Greenwald's website actually, I think, has the whole report on that case.
I'll have to look that up.
But there are issues with that case on the way the documentation and the way the shows presented it that wasn't quite factual.
Yeah, that's the problem with shows.
Because
they have to sensationalize things so they can make it more appealing. And if I go do this when I go do this documentary, I'm building this network with yourself, other MUFON people, other paranormals. I want to build a map to go to the spot where I'm going to find something. Because, look, if my documentary is boring and it's me looking at nothing, so be it. If I find something, great. But I want to be out there, and I want it to be pure. I want it to be organic. I don't want anything. I'm not going to make it put mystery where mystery doesn't belong. You know what I mean? I really want to go out there and find it.
That's a good thing, because one of the shows that featured that story presented it that an individual walked out, he shot a UFO, the metal dripped off. These investigators come out, they get the metal, they run it up to her house. She does they take it right to her on TV. She does an analysis. She looks at it right there and says, "Oh, this is really unusual."
Right.
Well, I called her up on that because they know her so well. And I said, "Wow, so those guys brought you that material and in 30 seconds you gave them an answer?" She goes, "No, I had that material for 2 years."
Wow. Yeah.
When she writes a report, it's like a 30 to 40-page report.
Well, they're not going to tell you that in a show, because they need to, because they need the show to be interesting, right? Sucks, but that's the truth.
And I'm wanting to think it was different grades of aluminum was what it was.
Right. Something
But
that
nothing,
we probably
nothing
couldn't
out
make.
of the ordinary.
Yeah, I
don't think it was any unusual isotope of any sort at all. I may be completely wrong, but I don't think it was. But that's the danger of the shows like that. And
yeah, they add, again, adding suspense where it doesn't belong, and I get why. Look, I get why. People, they want people to be glued to it, and they want their ratings. Like even this podcast, I do this podcast pretty naturally. I'm not worried about building any kind of suspense or the aha moments. I'm not worried about that stuff. I really enjoy speaking to you and learning. I want to learn and gather information. So when I go out and do a documentary, I have a good foundation to build it on, and strong ideas of where I'm going to go. So that I'm not going out, because if it were just up to what I read online, I would be in Florida for 5 years before I got to leave Florida. There's so much going on.
Oh, sure. Oh, without a doubt.
So yeah, the idea is I want to find the spots, and I'm going to build this network with you and other members of MUFON and other investigators and other paranormal. So when I get out there, I can find things, and at least look again. If I find nothing and it's boring, my apologies, but I did it purely,
And that's the way. Go ahead.
Or I find something and it's dangerous, and you get to watch it, and no one talks to me ever again because I'm going to run at it.
Well, these guys, I mean, we found the unusual iron in the soil. That was one thing. The clothing, one of the individuals had some chemicals, not unusual chemicals, but in unusual places on the clothing that the chemicals were found.
Huh.
And in one of the comparisons that was made is back to Betty Hill's dress from the 1960s. She had a similar type thing on her clothing, and the chemicals were also found in unusual places.
That case,
so
Barney and Betty Hill, for me, and again, in that time, it was a mixed race couple where they don't really, I guess they didn't want, they didn't want that attention then. And then you hear Barney's story, and there's a lot of strength in that story for all it is, right? There's a lot of strength in that story. And that's why I find that one very attractive. Again, they were in a situation in an era where there wasn't, black and white couples. And so whatever compelled them to come forward with their story, you have to understand that had to be a strong something to make them come forward. Because that's, in that time, you don't want that attention.
Back.
Yeah, set aside the idea of the UFOs
today,
and the criticism that comes with that, but they faced a lot of scrutiny in a lot of reasons, and yet they came. So I have to believe whatever compelled them was strong.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, back in the 1960s, I mean, people today, I don't think, understand really what it was like back then, especially for an interracial couple.
Right.
When I lived in South Carolina, I was seeing, what it was like with the segregation back then. We're just coming, basically at that point, mid 1960s. I mean, you had a lot of things going on. In my factory my dad worked at, there was still segregation at that point. And I couldn't figure it out as a kid. I'm like, why can't they work with you, Dad? That's the way it is, son. That's just the way it is down here. And
yeah, that blows my mind.
That was his answer. He couldn't explain it,
That's one of the other things too, as far as an advanced race coming here. I hear people often say, well, you don't get along with, truth is we don't. And it sucks. It still blows my mind in this era, how racism even exists anymore. It blows my mind. And then you have to factor in an advanced technology and or race coming from elsewhere, you better believe we're under a long-term study, because until we evolve for what they suits, for whatever reason they're here to watch us, and if we're not evolving, there's really no reason for them to communicate. Like, we could find a really super intelligent tribe of people somewhere, right? And we're like, we have, and we're going to preserve what they have. We're not going to be invasive. We're not going to bother them. But also, you don't invite them into, per se, Congress if they're still blood killing each other over, I don't know, a beachfront. You know what I mean? So it's tough. It's really tough for
it is. If they turn on our media, I mean, any form of our media, like television, especially the news, TV shows, are going to go, what is this? Maybe this thing should be erased and started over again, you know?
Yeah. Especially with our reality shows, right?
Oh, exactly. I mean, if they turn on the Kardashians, look out.
That's insanity in itself. Like, there's movies, and I'm sure they can watch movies and understand that that's, you know, an art form. But when you see reality TV, that's it. That's poor representation. But
exactly.
Thomas, I enjoyed our conversation tonight. I want to do it again.
Oh, no problem. Anytime, you just give me a buzz, you know.
For sure. Thomas, I thank you for having me on. If there's anything you want me to link up in the podcast for anyone to view, like your contact info, just send it to me.
Okay, will do.
All right, Thomas. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.